Another question that often comes up is this one. You mentioned that it might not be easy to find traumatic memories when you work with a client. Can you explain why? First, let me offer some context, and then I'll get to the why this isn't always easy. Finding what we in GTR call the core traumatic memory or memories is a must if we want to see results. A core traumatic memory is a memory of an event that is behind the specific symptoms or challenges that the client wants resolved. And if these unresolved traumatic events that hold the client's symptoms in place are not cleared, then the symptoms won't go away. Why? Because they're really the root cause of their problem. So we must find and collapse the core traumatic memories, not just any memories or not even any traumatic memories, but really the core traumatic memories behind the specific problems that the client is complaining about and that they want to see gone. Say, for instance, a client comes to you sharing how they have a terrible fear of disagreeing with someone when in a conversation. And what that looks like for them is that whenever they're talking to someone, even casually, even with the people that they're close to, they find themselves just nodding, almost compulsively, like it's out of their control. And the idea of expressing their opinion when it's not the same as that of the other person sends them into panic mode. They're frozen, glued to the spot, and incapable of doing anything else but the nodding, but agreeing, because it feels like a life or death situation to them. In order for this symptom to go away, we need to find the core traumatic memory or memories that are the root cause of this specific symptom. And this can be easier said than done without knowing what you're actually looking for and without knowing what pitfalls are in your way. Because while there might be clients who can readily identify the right traumatic event that holds their symptoms in place, there are also many potential pitfalls in your quest for the core traumatic memories. And unless you know how to tackle those pitfalls, you won't see optimal results, even if you apply healing protocols correctly. Let me offer you some examples. Traumatized people tend to dissociate from their body to one degree or another. In practice, this means that often they don't have access to the different signals coming from their body, such as you're tired, rest, or you're full now, stop eating, or this person is not safe, get away from them. They are just not in the body enough to hear and perceive these signals. And the same goes for their emotions. If you're not in the body, you will not feel. And of course, for a traumatized person, many times the emotions are so overwhelming that they would rather not feel them. So they numb out. If you dissociate, you won't be able to have access to your emotions. And what this means when you're working with a client is that sometimes they might actually talk about a memory that happens to be the core traumatic memory, and they will share it with you. And yet when you ask them what their emotional intensity is when they talk about that memory on a 0 to 10 scale, where 10 is the maximum, they would say, it's not that bad, maybe a 3. However, the reason why it feels like a 3 for them is because they are numbed out, they are dissociated, and hence unable to tap into the full emotional intensity of that memory. And if you don't know how to tell when this is the case, you might completely miss that golden opportunity, not realizing that this was, in fact, the core traumatic memory you were looking for. At other times, you might have the opposite. There are clients who readily share a traumatic memory with you, and they'll tell you that this is the memory, and it feels like a 10 out of 10, But what they're not realizing is that they're offering you a memory that they feel okay to share, but it's not the core traumatic memory. In GTR, we call this the PR version of their trauma. These are stories and memories that the clients learn to offer when people ask them about perhaps what happened to them in the past or why they have the challenges that they have. And they are not lying to you. They just don't realize that this is not the true core traumatic memory behind their symptoms. In fact, in the GTR training, we teach you how to work with the so-called avoidant client, a client who unconsciously uses avoidance coping strategies. Then take the example of ongoing trauma, where there wasn't just one traumatic event, but many of the same kind going on for prolonged periods of time. For example, physical abuse or sexual abuse or bullying. In this case, we teach you how to find the so-called prototype memory, and that way you don't have to work on each and every one of those many memories. Often that would actually be impossible. The clients may even not remember all of them. Another common pitfall is not knowing how to isolate the traumatic memory enough so that you can really collapse it. This is not isolating the memory so that it's clear-cut in order for you to work with it. And we teach you how to find the right segment in time, the right moment when the body went into trauma. Clients often give you what we call sagas. But in order to experience a powerful trauma release, the traumatic event and the memory has to be sufficiently isolated from what happened before and after the traumatization moment. It has to be narrowed down in a specific way. In GTR, we also teach that the order in which the client's traumatic memories are cleared matters as well. If you get the order right, you see results much, much faster. We have specific processes to determine that order. In other words, if your client has multiple traumas, multiple traumatic memories, we teach you where to begin and what to continue with. Clearing the aftermath events instead of the original traumatic events that caused the trauma is another common pitfall that we teach you to avoid. For example, the client might complain about their fear of driving, and they will tell you that they had a panic attack while they were driving their child to school. So you might assume that this would be their core traumatic event, but it might not be. It might be that the original trauma happened several years ago when they were riding a motorcycle with someone, and before they knew it, they ended up in the air and then being thrown onto the highway, where had they lost consciousness and not gotten out of the way in time, they would end up being hit by a truck. With trauma, you have this phenomenon where symptoms can show up years and years after the original traumatic event. And this is because there's a certain amount of distress that your body can take. But once that cup is full, any little stress happening even in day-to-day life can be the last drop. Let me now mention one last pitfall. And that is assuming what event is behind your client's trauma. It's going with the obvious, but things are not always obvious or linear when it comes to trauma. For instance, let's say that the client was given a terrible, scary diagnosis. In fact, they had to be hospitalized unexpectedly right away. And while in the hospital, they were in terrible agony and pain. Now, the obvious choice for finding the core traumatic memory might be the moment when they were given the diagnosis, or the moment when they were in the most terrible physical pain. However, it can be something completely different. And you will only find this in the history-taking process. It can be the moment when the client's young children came to see her in the hospital, and she realized that they might lose their mother and that there would be no one to take care of them. This particular area, finding and identifying core traumatic memories, is absolutely part of the GTR training. And one of the core strategies to learn how to do this is, number one, helping you develop acute observational skills. And number two, offer you numerous case studies with detailed case study guides that go along with those case study videos so that you know how to recognize and avoid these pitfalls in practice.